Ladies and gentlemen, we just witnessed something that I think, looking years into the future, we're gonna look back at this and say things like, this was it, this was where it all started, and boy did it start with an absolute bang. Because everyone knew going into this competition that it was going to be unlike anything we had ever seen in cubing up to this point, with just 28 competitors and a time barrier of 7 seconds. Yes, you had to have a 6-second average just to be there in the first place. And we saw the best cubers in the world from not only the US, but also multiple other countries, including second in the world Tymon Kolasinski from Poland, who luckily, you'll see why when I show you everything that went down here, also pulled up to Minneapolis on a Tuesday, along with 3 of the top 6 in the world. And round 1 of this competition, as 6th in the world Matty, Hiroto, Inaba would later describe it, already felt like a final situation because only the top 18 advance, meaning unlike a regular local competition, every single solve starting from round 1 matters so much more. And that definitely showed here because straight out the gate we could already see how nerves were getting to them. This is an environment that no one has ever seen before. It's all in the middle of this huge mall and there are only like 5 people solving at once.
I think Dylan just looked up and saw all the spectators.
So also, everyone's watching you, not only in person on this huge Jumbotron, but also on stream, which was one of the best cubing streams, if not just the best I've ever seen. Shout out to HappyFtProductions, this is absolutely amazing. And of course, that's all in case all of the other pressures and factors weren't already enough. And you could not only see that visually just watching all of this unfold on stream, but also just looking at the averages by the end of round 1. Almost no one was solving up to what they average, with only 9 of the 28 getting a 6-second average or better. But the top 3 spots in round 1 is really where it gets interesting here because Griesser, who comes into this competition in 6th, moved up to 3rd. And the only 2 5-second averages we saw in round 1 came from Dylan Miller, who actually got his 2nd fastest average ever, which is just insane to me with a 5.7. And then Tymon was simply, well, Tymon with a 5.59 average winning the first round, and he actually got this on his last solve too, which was really, really cool to see.
Final solve for Tymon. 4-1-4!
Yeah, a 4-14 with 2 pretty major lockups, but round 1 of 3 was only just the beginning here in terms of the madness that is to come, because the stakes for round 2 are much, much higher. From the 18 that made it to round 2, only 10 of them will move on to the final round, which is in a head-to-head format where one person solves at a time, and, well, it's basically just the most intense situation in all of cubing. So everyone's nervous, very few people did well coming out of the first round, and now just 15 minutes later they have to turn around and start round 2, and the way the script flipped on this one was absolutely insane. I mean, we saw this almost immediately with Brian Johnson securing a PR average on his 4th solve, which ended up being a 5.74. That would have placed him 3rd in round 1, where he ended up 15th. But in round 2, everyone was clearly settled in more because we saw 5 sub-6 averages and a PR from Bai that allowed him to just barely sneak into finals in 10th place. But of those sub-6 averages, 3 of them were from those who had already finished in the top 6 in round 1. And a lot of people's favorite to win the whole thing, Garrett, moved up from 11th in round 1 to finishing in the top spot in round 2 with a 5.68. But probably the most nerve-wracking solve up to this point was Dylan Miller's final solve here, where he had already gotten a 10 earlier in the average, so he basically needed a mid-6 to get into finals. And after channeling the power of 4th quarter Andrew Nemhard, he was able to throw down a 5.95 when it mattered most to clutch 6th place. And this is what all of the tension has been building up to: 5 solves from 10 of the best speed cubers in the world. There are people just walking through the mall who had to stop and watch this even though they have no idea what cubing even is, and all of this done 1 solve at a time with some fantastic commentating from Nick and Manu, which all culminated in one of the greatest moments in cubing I've seen in a very long time. First was Bai and Zeke Mackay, which for this being just the first head-to-head pairing we saw, it was pretty insane what happened. They both started out on really good pace, and then Ray somehow clutched a 6.32 PR average with the fastest solve he's ever done in competition on his last solve. But then Zeke finished with a 6.33 average, so 1/100th of a second behind Ray.
6.33!
But we don't skip a beat going into the 7th and 8th seeds, where there's definitely a bit of a story here, because Luke has been looking for a performance he can be happy with in a major finals round for a while, and a good average here would be huge for him going into the North American Championship. And he started the average off well with a 5.95 on the first solve and a 5.27 on the second. An incredible pace to be on. Nicolas, on the other hand, had a rough first solve, mostly due to the recognition here, and then he got a 7 on the next. But on solve 4, Luke got a huge 5.53 to secure sub 6, with a 5.59 best possible average going into the last one. But unfortunately, the last solve isn't great, so he ends up with a 5.95 average, which is definitely what he was looking for, and this even does have a chance to win him the whole thing. But then we have 6, Dylan Miller, who finished 2nd in the first round, and 5, Caleb Chen, who is the youngest at this competition. He's only 13 years old, but still one of the favorites to win. And neither of them came out with anything too crazy, Dylan with a 6, and Caleb messed up his F12, so he started with a 9. But they were both able to regroup and get some 5s and 6s near the middle of the average, and Dylan was able to secure a pretty solid 6.2 average with a 5 on his last solve. Caleb, on the other hand, getting the first sub-5 of finals with a 484. And that brings us to the final 4, which was by far the highlight of the entire competition. Starting with Matty, Hiroto, Inaba, and Tymon Kolasinski, a matchup we actually saw just last year in Worlds 2023. And of course it starts with a bang, a sub-5 from Matty coming through with a 476 on the first solve, which is somehow quickly overshadowed by Tymon's 438, a solve with decent luck on the last layer, but the second solve was a mid-5 from both of them, which is great pace to be on going into a pivotal third solve, where Matty gets another mid-5. But Tymon does something that most people didn't even expect to see going into this competition at all, especially with the environment they were in. But you know, second in the world for a reason. What more can I say?
What is Tymon's turning here? He's got a 4-3-9-2! Ladies and gentlemen, that's a sub-4 single!
This was honestly such a great moment, unlike anything I've seen in cubing. Like a 2.5 second F12 into a pretty nice last layer, so the solve was full step, and now his 4.38 is a counting time. Meaning this average has some really good potential, to say the least, depending upon what he finishes with on his last 2 solves. Matty's 4th solve though is super unfortunate because the lockup on PLO costed him quite a bit of time. Easily sub-5 if that didn't happen, but counting a 518 is still great in this situation. And Tymon's 4th solve has the same fate, just lockups that costed him a few tenths of a second, leaving him with a 680, and all of the pressure resting upon his last solve. His best possible average, 4.53, second in the world by an absolute landslide. Of course needing to get another sub-4 for that to happen, but Matty wraps up his average with his worst solve, an 807. But this is now a chance to witness history right here. He needs a 531 or better to secure a sub-5 average. Absolutely unthinkable going into this final, but as I've said in so many videos surrounding Tymon solving, he's been in these kinds of high-pressure situations before, and he's one of the best in the world at handling the nerves that come with them.
Starting off on the yellow cross, this is looking really good. 501! Tymon Kolasinski, 4.90 average!
Clutching a 5.01 on this A-perm, which you saw him using his 343 from Monkey League, by the way. But sub-5 in this environment is just unbelievable. One of the best moments in a finals round we've ever seen in cubing. Solving the commentary, everything was just so well done here. And the best way I can describe what happened in the 1 and 2 pairing between Brian Johnson and Luke Garrett was they both started in basically the worst position you can be in going into not only the round itself, because you do have to go last and wait for an extremely long time, but also going into solve 2 with a 7 and an 8 respectively. Brian then counts a 7 on solve 2, but Luke bounces back with a mid-5, so all hope of finishing with a good average isn't completely gone, but it's a huge mental game going into solves 3 and 4 because any mistakes you make will pretty much put you out of contention for a podium. Brian gets another 7 here and Luke with a low 6, but then Brian does something super interesting on solve 4, not only getting a sub-5 single, but also using this 1 look last layer, which there are 4,000 of these algorithms, but this is one of the easier ones to recognize, and it goes like this. So basically just sledgehammer into this insert. Luke got a 5.8 on the scramble, and then the final solves were a 6 from Brian, and Luke does have a chance to podium here if he gets a 5.8 or better. And the solve looked pretty good, but a lockup here at the end costed him, and he unfortunately ended with a 7, meaning the podium we finished with was Luke Griesser with a 595, Matty with 535, and Tymon with 490. So this finals and the whole competition itself, if I'm being honest, was insanely intense. That's one of the reasons why I really do hope that we see more of this in the future. And the other thing is, this was executed so insanely well for this being our first big go-around at something like this. Considering all the streaming setup, of course, and the huge jumbotron that they had in the mall, I really do hope that that got like a lot of people that maybe just saw it while walking by interested in cubing, and maybe even some kids to start cubing. And you know what? Maybe they can end up being faster than a 6-year-old someday, unlike you, because you're not faster than a 6-year-old. You're actually slower than a 6-year-old. So that is, you know, your daily reminder that that's the case. But yeah, huge thanks again to Matthew Mayernick and the whole team for streaming this. I'll link HappyFtProductions down below if you want to go check them out. I'm also up here and up here if you want to, you know, look at that. I don't know. But yeah, besides that, that's about it. See ya.